Hello and welcome to another SonicLAB. That was the intro sounds of the IK Multimedia Uno Synth Pro, which is what we're looking at today. This is the new synth in the range. There are two versions of this. We've got the keyboard version here, which has a 37-key FATAR semi-weighted aftertouch keybed, and then there's a desktop version, which I don't have, which is just the synthesizer brains and a kind of little capacitive keyboard. Synthesizer engine is exactly the same. IK's original synthesizer, their first one in fact, was the Uno Synth, which is this little guy here, which was a sort of low cost analogue, but quite sort of basic in terms of form factor, made in conjunction with sound machines. It's a lot of analogue goodness, and it actually sounded a lot bigger than it looked. And it's the same with the Uno Synth Pro. Uno Synth Pro is also designed with sound machines. If you saw, we had a video with Della, who is the product manager / designer. If you check that out, we kind of go into some of the thinking behind these designs. But essentially, this is the only IK second synth. And so far, it's actually quite impressive. It still has that analog sound. So a quick look at the features. We've got 3 analog oscillators. Identical. They're basically very similar to the ones that were found in the Uno Synth Pro. We can play it in paraphonic mode, so we can have 3 separate oscillators going through the same filter and amplitude. Then we've got mixer, we've got filters, a pair of filters. The original filter, which was a 2-pole multi-mode filter, and this has also got multi-mode. Let me just see what we've got. We've got 2-pole low pass. We've also flipped the phase of this. Then we've got high pass with the phase flip as well. Then the second filter is a SSI filter, and this is based on a design with input from Dave Rossum, the legendary Dave Rossum. So we've got 2 filters that can be in series or parallel. The second filter is a low pass filter. It could be 2 or 4-pole. There's more it's got more resonance and a bit more angry sounding. Add to that, we've got a pair of LFOs, filter envelope, amplitude envelope, then a 16-slot mod matrix, which allows us to dial in, well, up to 16 slots with sources and destinations. And this is where the kind of firmware can update things. I know that there's a firmware update coming very soon, which is going to include extra sources and destinations, but we'll get onto more of that later. We've also got 4 effects, I suppose. We've got an analog drive, just these are send amounts, mod, delay and reverb, and the reverb is actually really tasty. So we've got dedicated knobs for the filters and a sort of mod matrix arrangement for the rest of the parameters. Not all of the parameters are available on knobs, but that's easy to fix because we go into preset, press, and then we have, if I just bring that little overlay up, then we have all the different sections where we could do things like loop the envelopes and change the various other parameters in here, and also address the effects, algorithms and whatnot in here. Added to that, we've also got a 64-step sequencer with 20 lanes of parameter locking automation, an arpeggiator which can be recorded into there, and also song mode, which we'll get into. 256 memory locations, hit bank, change the bank, hit again, and then we end up with 16. So 16 by 16, and pitch and mod wheel, and the case is kind of nice. The other thing that's good about this, we've got connections around the back, full-size MIDI ports, woohoo, because the original Uno had a weird little jack and it didn't. So pair of balanced outputs, MIDI I/O, control voltage and gate assignable outputs, which are quite useful. That's in and out, plus an audio input for feeding into the synthesis engine. Anyway, I quite like the sound of this, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play you another sound, because this one I really quite like. I think it's just got a real, well, let me play it. This is in paraphonic mode because it will do 3 voices or 3 oscillators. Let's bring a bit of noise in. me, I love a bit of ambient noodling, and this has got that. It's not got frozen reverb, but you can have an up to 30-second reverb in here. But we'll get onto all of this stuff in the meantime. I think, suffice to say, I'm digging the sound. It's a little bit rough around the edges, but we'll get into that. So, yes, let's take a look at the oscillators and see what they offer. Okay, let's get the overlays on. You can see I've got a single oscillator here, just listening to one. As you see, I'm moving through the shapes. We start with triangle. Good, solid fundamental down there. You can hear that there is a little bit of sawtooth in there. I spoke to IK about it and they said, yeah, that's just the way it goes, and we didn't want to change it up too much because it would change the sonic characteristics. So it's not the cleanest of oscillators. So anyway, let's get back to this. So as we move through sawtooth, good tracking, and again, a decent fundamental down there at the lower points. And then we come through to square. And then we're into pulse width. I don't know if you can hear, there is a bit of sort of, I mean, you get the tearing, but there's just a bit of dirt when you move it around fast. But I mean, in terms of the weight, it's really hefty, I have to say. And that's the one thing that it's got in common. The original Uno Synth had this kind of extra weight and girth, and now because we've got balanced outputs and a bit more kind of sonic integrity on the audio path, they just sound beefy as hell. Next parameter is just tune, and we can go from -24 semitones up to a semitone, then we get 100 cents in either direction. So that's... So there are other parameters in here. We can also FM between 1 and 3 and 1 and 2. I'll show you that now. I've got a patch here which is just 2 oscillators. The third oscillator I'm not listening to, or this is oscillator 1, but what I'm going to do is we can get to this in 2 ways. So pressing the preset menu, oscillator 2, FM amount, we can dial in here, or we can come out and we can press the oscillator button and actually access that parameter via this shortcut, which is using the step key. So let's turn that up to 100%. And now oscillator 1, which we're not hearing, is FMing oscillator 2. And then maybe what we could do is let's put a bit of release on it. And then the matrix, I've got a good old sample and hold. Trick it out with some effects. We've also got a sync. We can do oscillator sync. So we get to oscillator sync by going to the oscillator mode. The first row gives us sync. We could set that to be sync off. Oscillator 2 sync, oscillator 3 sync, oscillator 2 to 3 sync, or we could get to it via the preset menu here. And I've got a patch which I created, which you may or may not recognise. Love me a bit of poodle rock. But yeah, the sync sounds fine, and you still get plenty of weight on those oscillators as well. So let's take a little patch break now, and I'll play you a few things that I've got going on. This is something I called Infinity. This is a paraphonic patch, and I'm using the filter envelope to bring in the send to the reverb. There's only 3 voices, and I've got each oscillator a different octave, so we get these automatic inversions. tell me you don't like that. That's very tasty. Incidentally, at the moment, there is no editor or librarian to this. I know this is happening because I did an interview with Della from IK Multimedia and said it's on the cards. So the patches that I've created for this, and I have been doing loads, will ultimately end up on our Patreon. So if you want to grab those, sign up and they'll be available as soon as the librarian's available. But there is other content there as well. Let's try a couple of other patches. And this is a kind of classic synth bass. And it demonstrates the touch sensitivity to the filter, but also just the weight and the sort of girth of it. This is a little 3-voice patch, again paraphonic, where they're all being all the waves are being modulated. It's like super pulse width modulation, so it's moving kind of through all the entire range of the waves. This one, no, let's see what this one does. I'm using the 2 filters to create a bandpass sound. This is what I played at the beginning. And I'm using the LFO to modulate the level of oscillator 3, bringing an octave below. And the aftertouch to modulate the speed of that modulating LFO. I've also got the pitch bend bringing in oscillator 2, which brings in the level and also the pitch bend, so it brings it monster that is, I must say. Anyway, that kind of is introducing the concept of the filter and obviously effects, so let's get onto those as well. So let's start with the traditional sawtooth into filter 1, which is the OTA filter, same as on the original Uno Synth. This is a 2-pole filter, switchable between high pass and low pass, 50% resonance. 100% resonance. It's got a quite quacky, but not all that resonant. But it doesn't lose any low end. Then we can switch it via the mode. We've got 2-pole low pass. Then we've got 2-pole low pass at 180-degree flip phase, which is useful when going to the second filter. Doesn't make any difference when you're just listening to it. Then we've got a 2-pole high pass, so let's drop the resonance down here. We can pick out some of those low harmonics, but because it's not a fully resonant filter, we don't get, yes, I'm going to say it, those sing-song harmonics, but it's quite handy when we combine, say, this with filter 2, we can run, and we're running them in series, so one into the other, we can create bandpass. Second filter, this is the Dave Rossum filter. Drop it an octave. It's a bit creamier. Let's see what mode this is in. Actually, this might be in 2-pole to begin with. Let's go to 4-pole for a bit more. Bring 50% resonance. Resonance doesn't really start to kick in until about 75%. Let's watch that level. You get a more sort of angry vibe. Let's try that in 2-pole. But say if we went back to the other filter and we take that into a high pass, we've got ourselves a moving bandpass filter. Now there's another couple of parameters here. We can obviously track the filter amount, but we can link, in this case the cutoff is linked. So you can link the cutoff and the resonance of both filters, so you end up with a single filter control effectively. We end up with kind of the combined of a 6-pole low pass filter, but then we can do other things. So if we then change the 2-pole into a high pass 180, we get these kind of really interesting sort of vowel-y sounds. So just a note on the spacing control, what I've got is filter 1 is in high pass mode, filter 2 is in low pass mode, and it's in parallels. So that means I'm hearing the 2. But what that means is I've then, if I select 1, then I've got, this is controlling the frequency of filter 1, and the spacing is controlling the filter of 2. So we get this kind of interesting phasing sound. In fact, if I've got a patch, which if I can find it quickly, this one is using that same technique and modulating that frequency to create this kind of like a clavinet sound, which when you consider there's only actually 3 notes available, that's reasonably authentic. Obviously I'm limited to the number of notes I can play, but it creates this very interesting sort of filter movement, and we've got all these combinations of those filters together which can create some really unusual sounds. The only thing I will say is, because it's sort of hidden behind menus, it is a little bit fiddly to get to. Of course, we can access the spacing and the filter frequencies of each in the mod matrix completely separately. So a quick look at the modulators here. I've got in the mod matrix, I've got LFO1 modulating filter cutoff 2, and that's the depth on the mod wheel. So this goes down to 1 hertz right up to right up to 99 hertz, so almost audio rate, but decent enough. And we've got a number of different waves here, and we can sync this. The noise is kind of good. Get some really interesting sounds. And vice versa, if we bring this back here and we go to the filter and we dial in the amount of filter envelope, and then let's just see how snappy that can get. Pretty snappy. And these also, if we go into preset, we can actually loop the envelope. So we do the looper envelope, we'll go here. So all kind of useful additional stuff there. The only thing I kept finding was, oh, wouldn't it be nice if there was another envelope or another LFO? Because there's so many mod matrix slots, you sort of think, oh, just one more would be really handy for some things, but I guess they had to stop somewhere. So now it's time for the effects. Let's take a look at those. To demonstrate the effects, I'm going to take you back a variant of the patch that I've played a couple of times. And this is using the delay and the reverb. So what I've got is, I'm using the delay. Then if I hold, I'm using the filter envelope to send into the reverb. So now these notes are not going into the reverb. If I hold, I'm creating that really long tail. So anyway, that's really by the by. I'm probably just getting a bit lost in that patch again. So if I just go to, say, something that's perhaps a bit less just a straight init patch, and we take a look at the effects. So press the effects button. To begin with, we've got, if we just bring the filter down and I take the drive up, we've got an analog drive, which is post filter. We've got modulation. I'll just add a bit of in this case a stereo chorus, but we've got phaser and flanger here. Then we've got various different delays. Then we've got a reverb. Now, this is all well and good. These are just the send amounts. To get to the actual parameters, we press the preset menu, and then we can go into the additional parameters. There aren't any shortcuts for the effects at the moment. I think there's probably those are going to be coming. They're just not there yet. So drive, there isn't really much we could do with that. Reverb, there's quite a lot. So we've got type, hall, plate, and reverse. Let's go for a plate. Come back, we've got pre-delay, then we've got the size, which we can whack right up, and the time, which we can whack right up to 30 seconds. Now that means we've got a very big, dense kind of reverb, but we've also got the ability to change the high and the low time separately. So I bring that up, much more low frequency, take the high down, do the opposite. There's no sort of modulation or anything going on this. We can't access any of these parameters via the mod matrix, but it's actually not a bad sounding reverb, if I'm honest. Take the reverb down and we come back out to the delay. It's a bit fiddly, this, that's the only thing. It would be nice to see them shortcutted. We've got ping pong delay. Left, centre, right. Stereo, mono. Mono, I think we can get up to, let's see where we go up. Sorry, I'm in the wrong. Yeah, this is a little bit, this is where it does show its limitations in terms of 1400 milliseconds, which is shared amongst, so if we had 1400 milliseconds and that was stereo, we'd have 2700s, etc, etc. Let's take that right down again. Yeah, this is a little bit scrolly. We'll come back out, see what we can do with the feedback. Only 80% feedback. We can't get too much screaming stuff. And again, this stuff, we can't modulate any of these things, which is a little bit of a shame. It would be kind of nice to be able to perhaps modulate the time. Even if it is a bit glitchy, it'd be nice to access some of these parameters. You know, the reverb is the star of the show, I would say, but the others are certainly, other algorithms are certainly fine. We'll go to the modulation. We've got chorus, phaser. Now, these don't get all that extreme, so we've only got colour, and in this case, we've only got rate. So we don't have all that much control over the mod effects. I mean, they're certainly welcome. They're just not perhaps as extreme as you might find on other synths. But we can get from this sound to this, you know, so it is able, it forms a great part of what we can do with this synth. But look, I get it. I mean, you know, you will have seen that there's a lot of menu sort of based functions in here, and that's not going to be for everybody. Some people find that infuriating. And it's been very interesting, my journey with this, because to a degree I find it infuriating too. But the results that you get with this synth kind of make it worthwhile, in my opinion. I have to say, I think it sounds really good. And I think the more you play with it, the more you find the possibilities are. And it's primarily down to the fact that those oscillators sound really good, and the filter and the effects, you just get, well, they get me to a place sonically that I'm happy to be in. So I'm prepared to forgive it some of these foibles and some of this stuff, but it will be great when the editor comes online, and we're told, certainly at the time this review came out, within the next couple of months or by the next couple of months. And I think that will really help a lot of people kind of get much more from this synth than perhaps they would feel prepared to do from the front panel. Okay, so another big part of this synth is the mod matrix, and the mod matrix, you hit the matrix button and then we have up to 16 slots. Just bring that in there, up to 16 slots, and then each slot has a source, a destination and an amount. And this is actually really powerful. It kind of creates this almost modular kind of control. And while I've been talking to Della, while I've been doing this review, not only do we get what's in there, but the latest firmware and versions coming up will add further granularity. So I think this is one area where the synth is going to be expanded and extended quite a lot, which I think will be great, because adding things like being able to address the individual effects parameters would be really handy. At the moment, we can only affect the send level. If I come to just this patch here, we'll do this. So I can also, as a source, not only do I get sort of the usual suspects, velocity, mod wheel, aftertouch, key pitch, all of these things, but I can actually set parameters that are assigned to these knobs can also be sent elsewhere at the same time. So let's take, well, let's go for oscillator 2 level, and we'll send that to oscillator, let's say, drive amount by this much. So now if I come back here, not only am I bringing up what's in oscillator 2, which let's make that a fifth up, just for the hell of it, so we can tell. So come back here. It's also turning up the drive, so it allows us to create almost kind of macros from these things. So this is kind of cool. There's some other really interesting amounts of things that we can put in here. We can also access the gate and the CV outputs, and also certain parameters. If we go up to further up, we can also set the mod depth as well. So we can create kind of, mod wheel to the amount of modulation. It's a little bit complex. Again, it does create this kind of rather display and menu heavy thing, but I think as soon as there's an editor there, it'll be much quicker. I mean, it's not impossible to use by any stretch, but for those of you used to knob per function, you might find it a little bit frustrating, especially as this synth sounds so analog. You kind of want to get your hands on the control. But I have to say, the modulation matrix is a very powerful aspect. Most of the patches I've created here haven't used more than 4 or 5, and there are 16 of these slots. And I think coming up, there are going to be even more sources and destinations. I've been told that there's going to be individual elements of, attack, portion, decay. So as well as the envelope depth, you've got the envelope components can go into that mod matrix as well as both sources and destinations. So one to watch, definitely. Okay, so we've got some more features to look at. Let's take a look at the sequencer. Pressing the sequence button brings that up. Using the Alt functions, we can do things like set the step length. We'll make that 32, can be up to 64 steps. No beat division, sadly, so we can't do that trick of having, quarter notes or whatever. It seems to be divisions of the master tempo. So we'll come back here. Let's record a sequence. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, so there's my sequence. Now that's all cool, but what I can also do is record up to 20 lanes of automation. So let's just put a bit. Let's record some other effects. Rather intrusive metronome. Nice to have a metronome, but yes, quite loud. So yeah, we can do all of that, but if we wanted to maybe just do more precise step modulation, we can literally just press and hold and maybe add certain parameters on each step, but there's no interpolation, they're just sort of fixed. So again, pretty cool. There's also a song mode. I'll whiz through this because it's actually quite a lot to get through. Song mode gives us the ability to sequence up to 64 of those presets and their sequence patterns. Literally in song mode, you press and hold, there's only one, you choose the preset. In this case, I'll go there, press, put that in there, in this one, in this one, this one. So basically I've just got about, so here we go. Let's start at the beginning. So it loads the sequence data and the preset for each one. There's just a random one I stuck in at the end. It's pretty basic, but it does work and it's nice to have. The tempo for the song is governed by the master tempo, which is different perhaps than you might have it set for each of the presets. Okay, a couple of little things. Press and hold to power off, and yes, there is a bit of a glitch. Press and hold to power on again, there's no other power switch, and you do get a pop there. And you also get a calibration routine, which does take a little bit of time. I guess that's calibrating the oscillators, the filters, all the other kind of stuff. But if you're in the middle of a gig, build in some, maybe come up with a couple of jokes to cover your embarrassment if you're waiting for your synth to reboot. Once it's there, shouldn't take too long. There we go, we're in. Another thing to point out is we do get a bit of clicking on the VCA, but we can get around that by just adding a little bit of an attack and a little bit of release, which doesn't really change the character of the sound, but does get rid of that clicking. It's just one of those things. Well, I thought I'd have a bit more sound just because it feels about time for that. It's been a lot of talking. And it's interesting that this synth has a lot to talk about. But I will say, you know, for all the kind of menu and the parameter access stuff that I know a lot of you are going to find to be, you know, maybe off-putting, this thing sounds really, really good. So I wanted to play a few more sounds just to kind of leave you with that impression before I do the wrap up. Okay, that's enough of that. So ultimately, what do I think of this thing? Well, the Uno Synth Pro certainly has, it's this big, bold synth. There's quite a lot of driven. The filter's quite hot. You know, the distortion adds this stuff. It sounds massive. It can sound really massive and ethereal, and quite a lot of things that I wouldn't expect from, you know, a three-voice paraphonic synth, because paraphony plays quite a big part of what this can do. It's flawed, you know, it's not perfect. The oscillators aren't perfect, you know, waveforms. There's no sustain pedal, no hold input, just the thing on the front, which is the hold button. But, you know, so there are a few little quirky issues with the firmware, which I think will probably be addressed as we go on. There's a few clicks and pops here and there, and I think, you know, for some people that level of menu working will just not suit, but ultimately it just sounds really good. I mean, I guess it depends on whether that is the sound that you like. For me, it really fits what I like to hear from a synth, and as such I think it's really kind of quite impressive that this is only a second synthesizer from them. Comes in two flavours. Obviously got the keyboard version here, which is around £699 UK. Quite a premium for that Fatar keyboard and the metal case. However, there is the desktop version, which is around £399 UK, which is actually pretty affordable, I think. And you do get quite a lot of synth for that. So we're talking about, you know, we're in the region of what you might pay for one of the Behringer synths, but this has got 3 decent effects in it, 3 oscillators per voice, 2 filters, and all these other features besides. I quite like it, actually, I must say, and I think just sonically it speaks to me. Whether it's the same for you, you'll have to decide, but hopefully I've given you enough ammunition to choose. So that's it for this time. Please do check us out on Patreon. We'll be posting some extra content there, and as soon as these patches, the librarian is available and I can post, I'll be putting them up there as extra content to our subscribers. So thank you very much for watching. That was the IK Uno Synth Pro. See you next time.